Hello, everybody, guys. We are going to start our today's webinar from our tech series or tech talk series. Today we're going to have fourth webinar from the series. This one will be the webinar called Development Guide for Beginners. But before we start, let us wait for a couple of minutes. Let us wait for the participants to join our webinar. And after that, we actually start webinar and the discussion itself. So let us just wait for a couple of minutes. Okay, so it looks like we have no participants for already a minute. So let us start webinar. So again, let me welcome everybody on our fourth webinar from the Oro Tech Talk series called Development Guide for Beginners. And before we'll start the webinar itself, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Yevhen Shishkin. I am an architecture advisor, project lead, and technical trainer of the Oro Inc. company. And in total, I already have more than 10 years experience in e-commerce development and e-commerce customizations. So today I'm going to tell you some best practices about the development of the Oro application. These best practices will be especially important for the beginners and the people who still do not have a lot of experience in Oro development. So what this is about. All this webinar, almost an hour, will be about the useful advice and best practices for our beginners and other or developers who may want to learn something new about how to develop the application, how to deploy the application, how to set up the environment, about the useful tools, and some other tips and tricks here and there. So the first thing we're going to check for today is the local environment. So there are tons of questions from developers across the world on how to install Oro Commerce locally. And actually, we as Oro do not have a strict recommendation on how exactly to do that. I would say that we have 4 standard setups for the local development, and here they are. So the first one, most typical and most clear and transparent one, is the native local environment. By native local environment, I mean it's a situation when you are installing all the applications and all the services at your root operational system. For example, if you're using Linux, you can install the database management system, MySQL, PostgreSQL, directly in Linux. You can install RabbitMQ, you can install Elasticsearch, and many other tools. And all these tools will be available directly to the operational system, and you will have a direct access to all these tools. This is the most convenient and most transparent way to do it, although many developers disagree with that and prefer other ways, and they have their point. So the next typical way to set up a local environment is through the Docker. So there are many Docker containers, Docker containers set up of or commerce in the internet. You can find a couple even in the or ink namespace in the GitHub. But here, if we're talking about Docker, there are two ways how you can use the Docker. The first one is when you have everything inside the Docker container, the application, the services, all the dependencies, pretty much everything. So in such a case, you have packed everything, and it's pretty easy to set up this kind of environment on any PC, any laptop, or any environment, including remote servers and so on. The second way how you can do it is like a hybrid between the native and the Docker. So let's say you can install PostgreSQL as a Docker container, Elasticsearch as a Docker container, RabbitMQ as a Docker container, and so on, while the actual code and let's say web server and the PHP will be run on the native environment. This kind of hybrid is very convenient because you still have all the power of your operational system through the direct access to it. For example, you can debug different things here and there, but the external services, again, like database management system, for example, PostgreSQL, like Elasticsearch, will be handled outside, and you will just connect to them through the IP address and port, like to any other third-party services. And basically for the application, there is no big difference if, let's say, PostgreSQL is installed on your native machine or through the Docker container. So these are the two most typical setups, native and Docker. However, we also have two more that we recommend to use to some of our customers and to some beginners. The third one is through the usage of WSL. So this one is a pretty common setup for the Windows users because recently Windows have introduced Windows subsystem for Linux. This is what WSL stands for. And basically what you can do, you can install a Linux core on your Windows machine and then use this Linux core to run whatever you want to run. Inside the WSL, you can run a Docker. So you have a hybrid between the hybrid of Docker plus WSL. You can directly run the PostgreSQL, Elasticsearch, and other services. You can directly have the code there, or you may have a code outside. So again, there are quite a lot of combinations and quite a lot of ways how you can use WSL to set up your local instance and do the development there. You can do it as a native one, so basic WSL plus native, or WSL plus Docker. It is up to you. And the fourth setup is the setup with the virtual machine. So for example, you can set up a virtual box, create a virtual machine there with any operational system you like, Linux, Mac OS, Windows, and set up everything inside it. I would say that this is the most encapsulated approach of all these four. So you will have everything inside the virtual machine. You will have the IDE, PHP, external services, the code, the repository, everything will be inside this virtual machine. On one hand, it's pretty convenient and pretty useful. On the other hand, the performance, I would say, may be the worst of these four. So it still will be pretty good because most modern CPUs support virtualization, and so the calls will be pretty efficient. But still, the performance will be not as good as, I would say, native local environment. After all, it's up to developers to set up, to choose which way do you want to use to set up your application. It's just a matter of preference and the operational system you have on your machine. The next thing I would like to talk with you is how to actually run this thing and what kind of infrastructure you can use, or what kind of structure of the servers and structure of the machines you may or should use during your development. So here we do not have anything really special. We are following the standard approach. So it's basically standard across the world, with 4 types of the server machines, or 4 types of the installations. So the first one is development. Usually it's local development, so it may be a local machine, it may be some kind of remote server that you can use for development. Uh, its main purpose, well, development, writing the code, testing the code, deploying the code, fixing the issues, finding the issues, checking the code together with your colleagues, and so on. The next one, the next approach, or next server type is the testing. This one is usually used by the quality team, quality assurance engineers, QA leads, and other people who are responsible for the quality and testing the application. And this one is like a next step in this chain. So first you're deploying your code to the development server, you're checking it there, you're testing there, fixing the issues there, and when everything is okay, you are ready to deploy it to the testing server, where your quality team is going to evaluate it, check for the issues, understand whether the feature is all right or not, whether requirements are matched or not, and so on. Sometimes testing server is also used to show the features to the client or to the customer who requested the feature or the customization. Sometimes not. Actually, here is the matter of the preferences. Some people use testing for that. Some people use staging for that. But for development and the testing, there is one more really important restriction. There must be no client data there. So you always have to work either with the fake data or the sanitized data. You are not allowed to store your production database neither on development or testing environments. This is done for the security reason. So to follow this recommendation, you must either filter all the client data or the sanitize of the client data. So if, let's say, somebody will steal your laptop, will have an access to the testing or development environment, the intruder will not be able to get any useful data from the database. Yeah, one more thing, development testing environment are usually using pretty weak hardware comparing to next two setups. That's why, because that's the reason of that is because we don't really care about the performance during development testing. We're caring on the performance, about the performance only later on when we are starting to deploy it into the staging and production. So the third infrastructure type in the row is called the staging. Staging, or sometimes it's called pre-production, is used for the final acceptance of all the features. And here you already have either the data pretty close to the production data, or at least the same amount also in the production data. The reason is simple. Staging has to behave exactly as the production, and staging has to have a comparable amount of data, comparable amount of users, similar configuration, similar infrastructure, etc., etc. Ideally, all the external dependencies, like for example integrations, staging has to be synced with the staging third parties as well, in order to have the setup that is as close to the production as possible. And the final and the fourth one, server infrastructure in a row, is called the production. This is your live server or live infrastructure, where you are handling all your customers and you have real production data. Everything has to be secured there. You should use the encryption. You should not allow anybody outside your development team, or maybe development team plus your security team, to have access there. So it's the most protected environment that is basically contains all the important data and the customer data. Talking about the staging and production, they have to use good hardware. By good, I mean the hardware that can handle the load of your customers. And the Only difference between staging and production should be in the data that is stored in the database. Everything else should be either pretty close or absolutely the same. So now we know what is the structure of our application. This is the structure of the servers where application will be deployed. So where to start, how to start, what should we do? We're going to start from the application creation from scratch. So how to do it? Or commerce is deployed as an application through the GitHub, and so you can use you should use Git to clone your application. And basically, this is the first step in the workflow of setting up and creating the application. You have to clone your application in order to have a local copy here. The first trick, or the first mistake that is done by some customers, they are immediately committing all the files as they are to the new repository. So they're cloning, creating new repository, and simply pushing everything to new repository. The issue in this approach is that you may lose the history of the Git commits that were created by the ORA team. The problem with this is following. You will not be able to easily upgrade to the following versions. You will have the conflicts, or you will need to manually do upgrade every time. So what is the correct way to do it? The correct way is to clone the application and push the change to your own GitHub server, including the history of the Git users, including the history of all the commits from the ORA team. This way you maintain the history, and the merge with the next versions will be significantly easier. So, and the second step, adding a second remote, is that pretty useful thing and pretty useful approach for the upgrade to the next version. Well, upgrade to the next version is pretty common thing, especially when you're upgrading to the patch version, like small upgrades without any compatible changes. And in order to perform this kind of upgrade, second remote is the pretty useful thing. So let me quickly show to you how I set up it locally. I have my own application. This is the link to this application. It's called Sample or Commerce. Feel free to check it out and set it up locally. There you find quite a lot of useful information, scripts that you will see later on during today's talk. So here is my setup of the application. The directory is called sample or commerce. That branch name is called sample setup. And if I will quickly check remote, you will see that we have two remotes. We have origin remote that is used to store actual changes and actual customization for its application. And there is one more remote. I have called it source, and I added it manually. And here you can see a link to the original repository of our commerce application. Why do we need that? Well, this way or this approach is a pretty convenient approach to perform the upgrade. So let's say we have some kind of version, for example, the new version, and we need to fetch this version. We need basically to get this version and merge our application with this version. So how to do it? So first of all, we can fetch our new origin called source. So we can see some additional changes in the branches. We see some kind of commits, and in general, we can either go to the storefront and check through the GitHub what kind of branch and text we have here, or we can just check branches. Here we see all the branches we have here. So pay attention, most of them are coming from the source. And in addition to these branches, we also have a tags. So let's assume that we want to upgrade to some specific tag. The easiest way to do it is just check out a new branch. Let's say 5.0 something. And what you can do now, you can just merge appropriate tag. So here you can see quite a lot of these tags. An application will simply create a new merge commit, and what you can do right now, you can just push it to your remote. Pay attention, you can push it to your origin remote, so remote that is used to store the customization, not remote of Aura, because you simply don't have permission to do it. And by doing that, you can simply create a new branch with a new version. Then you can create either merge request or pull request to the master or primary branch you're using. And then this will be your upgrade. Pay attention, we have no conflicts, we have no problems with the dependencies, we're just upgrading a couple of files and that is it. No copies, no conflicts, no problem with maintaining the history. All the history is maintained as it was. Let me quickly switch to the previous branch, but I think you got the idea of how to perform an upgrade through the second remote. Next thing is the installation. So installation is pretty straightforward process. You're running the composer dependency, you are installing the composer dependencies, you are clearing your data, and then you are running or install command. Well, you can automate that, you know. The easiest way to do it is to create some kind of script. I'm personally using shell scripts. You may use any other tool you like. This one is called install app shell. And here you can see that I'm removing the vendor directory, rerunning composer install command in order to have latest version of dependencies, creating database. I'm using Postgres for this installation. So here is my database called sample app, and I'm also installing UUID or SPP or SSP extension to it because it's required for the application. Removing the cache, clearing up the install parameter. Pay attention, the install has to be set to null in order to have clean installation, and running or install command with the parameters. So every time I want to install application from scratch, I'm just running this shell script, and that's it. There is nothing else to worry about. And final good advice for the local development is to use fake mailer, for example, mail catcher, instead of the real mail, because if for some reason you will still have some kind of real email in your system, you will never send email to this person. It will always caught by the fake mailer. You can set configuration for the fake mailer in your parameters YAML file. Here you go. For example, this is the one I'm using, 127.0.0.1.10.25. Next thing I would like to talk with you this the useful tools and approaches that you can use to write the code efficiently. I'm not going to talk about the standard and common things like solid, grasp, keys, Yagni, and lots of other ways and common approaches for good development. You can read all about them. You can read about them in the internet. You can find information in the good books. All these tools and all these approaches are great. However, I'm going to concentrate on tools that are specific to the Aura, or at least to the Symfony and PHP application that you can develop. So I'm going to talk with you about the PHP and PHP Storm best practices. PHP Storm is the IDE for developing PHP projects. This is de facto standard for PHP development, but if you don't like it, you can still use most of these tools mentioned there, although they'll be integrated with your IDE. So the first group of the tools I would like to share with you is the code quality tools. There are three common ones that we're using on almost every customization projects. These are PHP Code Sniffer or PHP CS, PHP Mess Detector or PHP MD, and PHP CS Fixer. All these tools are available as binaries under the bin console, under the bin directory, together with the console script. And if you want, you can run them directly from the directory. So let me quickly show it. Here is my PHP Storm, here is my bin directory, and here you can see binaries for PHP Code Sniffer, PHP Mess Detector, and PHP CS Fixer. So you can run them directly from this directory. Second thing that you should do if you're using the PHP Storm, you should configure integration with these three tools. There are two things that you need to do. The first thing, you need to actually set up the tools themselves. By default, they are set up here, PHP quality tools. So here we have reference to the PHP Code Sniffer. You can refer one of them. You can have a reference to the PMS detector, and you have reference to the PHP CS Fixer. And of course, here you can set up a direct URL to the appropriate project and to the binaries that application, in our case PHP Storm, will use to run appropriate tool. And the next thing you need to actually configure these tools. These tools are configured under the Inspections tab. We need the PHP ones. Yeah, here we go. So here are our inspections on the start on the PHP quality tools. And here you have a reference to all these three tools as well: PHP code sniffer, meta detector, and CS fixer. PHP code sniffer can be set up either with one of the existing coding standards. For example, PSR2, this is the one we're using internally for all our projects. Or you can set a reference to the custom one. I have a PHP CS XML file as an example. So if you want, you can set it up right here. The second thing you can set up is PHP mess detector configuration. Again, here we have a custom rule set, although you can use one of the standard ones, obviously. And same thing with the PHP CS fixer. So PHP CS fixer is used, may use either one of the existing rule sets, or again, you can set up your custom one. The sample application repository has appropriate configuration: PHP CS XML, PHP MD XML, and PHP CS Fixer PHP that you can use if you want to run the application. One final thing I have created here, and I have created a script that you can use if you want to run them outside PHP Storm in order to verify that everything is all right. Basically, here are the scripts. You manually are running appropriate tool, passing appropriate argument to them, and the directory that you want to check. Customizations are usually stored under the .src directory, so this is the directory I am checking here. So then if you want to run the script, you can just do it, check the output, and well, if you have some errors, you will see them. Currently for this one, I don't have any errors yet. Next type of recommendation, next time as best practice, is related to the debugging. I hope you know what is Xdebug, you know what the kind of library, what is the library and how to use it. And what you can do together with the PHP and Xdebug, you can set up a remote debugging and allow your customer or allow you to immediately check what is going on in your application. So Xdebug itself is just a PHP module, a PHP library. If you want to set it up, you have to do it in the PHP Storm. Here you go. You can set up a configuration for it. And you can set up what kind of port will be used. By default, it's for the it's either 9000 or 9003, depending on the version of the Xdebug. And after that, you have to enable the PHP module for the Xdebug. However, talking about PHP modules, there is an issue here. If you're enabling Xdebug, Xdebug will slow down all your execution between 2 and 3 times. So how to handle it? The solution is simple, is to have a small script that quickly enables and disables Xdebug. My scripts are called Xdebug enable, Xdebug disable. For example, this one will enable Xdebug and this one will disable Xdebug. And you can also find the scripts directly here in the repository. So if you want to see what they're doing under the bonnet. So if I want to start debugging, I'm calling the script Xdebug enable. If you want to stop debugging, I'm calling the script Xdebug disable, and they are doing everything else for me here. Now let us see how they work. So first type of debugging is called browser debugging, or debugging from the browser. It allows you to quickly check what is going on through in the appropriate controller through your IDE through the PHP Storm. So let me quickly refresh the page without Xdebug, just to be sure that everything is all right, and it is all right indeed. And now let me enable Xdebug. And let's assume I want to debug this controller. I want to understand what is going inside it. So this is the customer controller. From the customer bundle, That's the one. We are now in the index section, so I can put breakpoint here. I can listen to the incoming connection. This is the button in the PHP store. I need to enable debugging in the browser. I'm using here Xdebug extension for the Google Chrome. And if I refresh the page, the application should intercept my call. And you immediately see here that we have a breakpoint on this line. We have the context here, so we can check what kind of controller we have and what we have as dependencies in this controller. We can evaluate the expression. For example, we can get some information from this context. We can check what will be done later. For example, here we're seeing that our response variable is now just an array. We can debug the event. For example, this event is responsible for the rendering a tweak template for this action. So if we wait for a second and two, we will see that the response will be not just a array, but now the response will be a real response object with the HTML of the response that have to be sent back to the browser. So the second type, how you can debug your code, is through the command line. Let's say you want to debug one of the command lines, either from Aura or from the Symfony, or maybe even your own. Let's say I want to debug search indexation. So here I have set up a PHP script. It's called Aura Upside Search Index. The file to run this command is called bin console. It's a reference to my bin console script. Then I have the arguments. And now I can debug what is going on inside this command. So let's assume I want to debug the specific listener responsible for the indexation. Let's pick one from the product bundle. This is one of the typical listeners used to reindex products. For example, this one. So what I can do, I can put breakpoint here, pick the appropriate script, run it in debug mode. So this have a separate button for it. So here we have we had the breakpoint inside the command itself. And if we continue execution, it will be intercepted in the listeners where we have just put the breakpoint. And you can do the same thing. You can step in, you can step over, you can check all the variables, you can check the context. If you want, you can immediately evaluate the expressions in the watch tab. You can see all the information there about the products, about localizations, and so on and so on. This is extremely useful tool when you want to understand what is going on in your application and what you need to change there. Next thing I would like to quickly check with you is the workflow of development. How should you organize your work in order to do it efficiently, quickly, and without extra issues and problems later on in production? So there is a pretty standard workflow that consists of 5 elements, and we are going to check this flow now. The first element is development. So I think this one is pretty straightforward. You need to write the code in order to build a feature. So when you are writing the code, you can use quite a lot of common approaches and best practices like agile methodology, extreme programming, test-drive development, and others, including the solid keys, Yagni, and other things we have discussed. So this is what most developers think is the workflow. However, it's just a first step. The second step in this workflow is to write an automated tests for the feature you have developed. The main point of automated tests is to let application test itself in order to find issues and notify you or somebody from your team about these issues, and that will be a sign that you have to fix them. There are 3 primary types of automated tests that are supported in our commerce. These are the unit tests, functional tests, and PHAT tests. So unit tests are used to test one specific class. Functional tests are used to check the application in general without the browser level components, like for example, JavaScript and CSS. And PHAT is running a real browser with the real application in it and tests pretty much everything. After you did that, the next logical step is to perform a code review. So you may ask your colleague to verify your code, verify the feature, and check what is going on there. And again, code review consists of several steps. So the first step is perform the functional review to make sure that functionality works as it should. Next step is to check the architecture, that the new feature has a proper architecture and does not break any of your architectural standards. Then you can check the implementation. So code itself, you have no major issues there. You have no some kind of security issues like SQL injection and so on. Check the automated tests that they cover all the functionality and not skipping or missing any parts of it. And finally, documentation. The fact that you have written documentation for other developers, so they will know what did you do in scope of this pull request or this feature. Next step is the continuous integration. This is the step where you can set up the continuous integration server that will test your code automatically, so you can test the installation, the fact that the application still can be installed with all your changes. There can run the automated tests, so you may verify that you have no errors from the unit integration, unit functional, and the BHAT tests. And the code quality tools we have checked before to make sure that the quality of your code is good. Then we have documentation. We have checked it already before, and documentation, you have to verify that documentation is there and is all right. And finally, the quality assurance. So this is the step where you're asking the quality team to verify that everything is all right. Here you can use acceptance testing in order to verify that functionality is right. Regression testings to make sure that new feature did not break any other features, and some other types of testing depending on what kind of team you have, how many QA engineers you have, and what kind of internal processes you set up to verify the quality. So this is a typical flow that you can follow if you want to build a good application that has nice quality, low amount of issues, and maintainable and supportable in the future. Next thing I would like to share with you is the typical release structure. So really, this thing really depends on the team you're working with, depends on kind of internal approaches. And that I'm just going to share two approaches we're using internally in different projects. So that may be a good start for you if you're going to start a totally new project. So the first approach is pretty straightforward and de facto standard in many areas is the semantic version. So this versioning assumes that you have three primary parts of the version number: major, dot, minor, dot, patch. So here you can see them: major, minor, and patch. Major version is used, or the way recommending to use them, to mark OroCommerce LTS upgrades. LTS stands for long-term support. OroCommerce releases long-term support version every year, and what we recommend is to erase the first digit every time you're upgrading to the next LTS release. Let's say you started with 4.1 LTS, you will have major version 1, then you have upgraded to the 4.2. You may have major version 2, then you have upgraded to the 5.0, then you have major version 3, etc., etc. The second digit, the minor one, can be used to mark your releases. So, for example, every time you want to deploy a big scope of change to the testing, staging, or production, you may create a new release. For example, it will be 1.5 or 2.11, and this release, this version will contain the feature you want to deploy. And finally, the third digit, the patch one, can be used to deploy patches and fixes. Let's say if you have found the issues or problems in one of your releases and you want to deploy them without deploying any new features from the next release. So it's a typical usage of the semantic versioning, where here we just recommend to use major and minor digits for the OroCommerce LTS releases and your internal releases of the customizations and the features you have developed. Second approach is simple. You just copy the version from the OroCommerce and adding another digit in there. So let's say you're currently using 5.0.5 version. So your version will be also 5.0.5 point some other incremental version you want to mark for your release. For example, 5.0.5.11, 5.0.5.12. both these approaches are pretty fine. It's just up to decide which one will suit you the best. Now the important question, the integration. So I would probably say that we haven't had any application without integration with third-party application, and this is the important component and important thing you as a developer has to be aware of, and you as a developer has to know how to implement. We're going to cover two typical approaches to write integrations with third-party applications. The first one is the standard or native OR integration bundle. So this bundle is responsible for providing you a layer with the data, the configuration, the standard components, the standard scene commands that basically cover all your, or basically cover almost all your requirements related to the third-party integration. So integration bundle is based on the OR import export. Basically what it's doing, it's running import or export process, but not for your files, but for the third parties. So basically it reads data from the third party, processes them and writes it to your application, or vice versa. It reads data from database, processes them and writes them to the third party API. Our integration bundle has lots of the nice things. For example, the multiple connectors. When you're working with the standard OR integrations, you may have one integration channel that will have multiple connectors. So let's say you have some kind of ticketing system and you want to sync the tickets, you want to sync the users, you want to sync the comments, and so on. And another good approach, another good thing about our integration bundle is the fact that you may have multiple instances of the same integration. Let's say you need to sync with two instances of the ticketing system, and let's say you need to pick tickets from first website from the first ticketing systems and ticket from the second website from the second ticketing system. So you need to have two instances of the integration. Let me quickly show you how it works and what you can do there. So here under the manage integration section, you can set up your integrations. Out of the box, we have several that you can use. And for example, here we have a Zendesk integration ticketing system, which you can use out of the box. This integration have three connectors. For example, it may sync users, tickets, and comments, and you as administrator can pick one of those or not pick any of those if you want to sync this information. And of course, you can create another integration, but now I mean another Zendesk integration, just by picking appropriate integration type from this list. And then you can pick all the configurations, pick the appropriate connectors, and that will be it. So you have multiple instances, and each of these instances have multiple connectors. However, not all integrations, wait a second, yeah. However, not all integrations need this kind of complicated structure and complicated approach with multiple connectors and multiple instances. Many applications are just happy with having only one configuration, one instance, and for such cases, you may use a simplified approach. So simplified approach assumes that you store your credentials in system configuration, of course, in the encrypted form. Here you have no exceptions. And then instead of using the standard synchronization with the import export jobs, you can simply trigger a cron command. So you can implement your own cron command and use this cron command to get some data from the third-party API or push some data to the third-party API. Important notice here. If you're going to use cron command, you must not do it directly in the cron command. You have to do it asynchronously. So cron command has to send the message, or at least trigger asynchronous synchronization. And then the synchronization will be performed by, not by the cron command itself, but one of the workers and one of the job nodes that are actually responsible for that. Next area, which is pretty common for most customizations of Oracle Commerce application, is the initial data loading. So every time you're setting the application, you're expecting that it will already have some data in it. For example, to have list of users, maybe list of customers, customers group, maybe the orders from the previous system if you are porting your data from the previous system, maybe list of products, categories, quite a lot of different things. And this is exactly what we're going to discuss now. Initial data import can be done in several ways. So first of all, the thing that you can do out of the box, you may use one of the standard ORO import connectors. So you can use command ORO import file if you have appropriate processor for the appropriate entity type. For example, we have it for products, for categories, for customers, for users, and so on. And you may just adjust your file to match the ORO structure, and that will be it. Run command ORO import file, pass the file, pass the processor name, pass the file name. That will be it. Application will import all the files after you will execute this command. Second approach is through the using of data fixtures, or uses a concept of data fixtures, basically it's like trying data fixtures, in order to preload data during the application installation. There are lots of fixtures in the standard or core, but I have developed a small bundle that demonstrates you this approach. So here I have a bundle called Initial Data Import Bundle. And in this bundle, we have a migration called Load Acme Customer Data. What this migration is doing, it's reading the YAML files with the source data. Here we have customers and customer groups. It creates appropriate entities for the data from these files. So let's say first we're creating customer groups. Here we have names of our customer groups and saving them to the database. And then we are creating the customers, assigning them to newly created groups, and again, pushing this information to the database. Pay attention that migrations execute automatically when the application is installed, so you shouldn't care about running them manually. Everything will be done automatically. You shouldn't even care about this stuff after you write it for the first time. The second approach for the initial data import is the command line command. So what you can do, that you can implement your own simple command line command, which will do whatever you need to do. For example, it will preload historical orders. I have an exact command here. This is a command called acme load historical orders. This is the command that can load the JSON data from the file, parse them, check for the orders, and create new order entities. This is a very convenient approach. Let's say if you are porting your orders from the old application to the new application, and you want to have all the information about the products in this application as well. So what is going on here? This command reads the data, and for each row from the source data, it creates a new order entity, adds a couple of products to these orders, recalculate totals, and save it into the database. Let me show you how it works. First, I would like to show you the source file I'm going to use. Here is my historical orders JSON file. And then here is the command called acme load historical orders. I will run it. And here we can see that we have 0 orders loaded because we have already loaded them before. So let me quickly show it to you. Here we have list of the orders. We have demo data orders, plus we have 2 orders we have preloaded before that. So let me quickly show you that orders. Let me sort this information by created at. And here we're seeing these 2 orders. They have prefix old dash in order to indicate that this order has been imported from one of the old software or legacy software. And you can also see that they are closed because, well, if they're imported, they are obviously closed. Inside these orders, we have information about the order ID. For example, this is 1876. We have information about the customer who ordered that order. We have subtotal. We have lists of products that have been ordered, and maybe some additional information that you may and actually should import from your legacy system. Next thing I would like to talk with you a bit is the application optimization. It's a pretty common step in the application development that is usually that you need to care of either before going live or immediately after going live, because when the customer started complaining about the performance of the application, you definitely have to do something about that. There are several approaches that you can follow if you want to optimize approach of your optimize performance of your application. So the first one, you can use the Symfony toolbar. This is the easiest thing that does not require any special skills. You can enable most of the profiles here in the Symfony toolbar, and then you can see what is going on there. Let me quickly refresh the page. Probably let me actually disable this debug to make it a little bit faster. And here's our application. So here in the Symfony toolbar, you can find quite a lot of useful information that may help you to understand why your application is so slow. For example, you may check the logs. If you have some kind of problematic issues, that you may find them in the log. For example, here I have some kind of error. You may check list of events. If you have too many events triggered, that may have too many listeners, and that may be an issue as well. You may check the cache layer, you may check the security, you may check, for example, the doctrine layer in order to understand what kind of queries you have and how long this query execute. Perhaps you can optimize them. You may check statistics for the doctrine in order to see what kind of, how many times some queries hold, whether you have identical queries and so on. Next thing that you can use for the performance optimization is the Blackfire. Blackfire is the external tool that you can run at your application in order to verify that something isn't right and at least find the bottlenecks, and then you can fix them. So in this case, for this application, I have developed a small customization that compromised the performance of the shopping list page. Now I want to figure out what is going on, what exactly has compromised the performance, and how to fix it. What I need to do that, I need to open appropriate page I want to optimize. For example, in this case, it will be the shopping list page. And then I have to run a Blackfire profiling tool here in order to profile this page. So profiling usually takes a couple of seconds. So let us wait a bit for it. So here you can see the progress bar of the profiling. What is happening right now? Blackfire is sending multiple requests to this page. It collects information about the classes that you have there, about the configuration of your application. It collects a lot of information about how much time it took for each function and each class to execute, what is your autoloader configuration, and so on and so on. So pretty nice and useful tool. Let us wait for a couple seconds more. The profiling is almost ready, and then we can verify what kind of potential issues we have with this page. So currently it's uploading data to the Blackfire server. Let's wait a bit for it. And then we will be able to verify the bottleneck, verify the profile of this request and see if we have any bottlenecks there. Yeah, here we go. So there are two things, two primary areas, or two primary tools that you can use to verify the performance: the timeline and the call graph. Usually I prefer to start from the timeline because it gives you a nice graphical representation of your request execution. So here you go. Here you can see the call graph of all the things that is going on there. And we immediately can see two primary areas here. We see the request event and we see the view event. View event can be big because we have quite a lot of things to render there. So let's assume that this is all right. But the request event is too big. something isn't right here, right? So the first request, the first problematic area we can see here is this listener firewall on kernel request before routing. I know for sure that this one is fine because here we have logs on the session level, we have file session level, just because of logs on the file system. So if you're going to use Redis, you will have no this problem. There's just an issue of local environment. However, the second one, shopping listener on kernel request, this one is some kind of other thing. So you can see that execution of this listener took 825 seconds in debug mode. And so something fishy is going on about, right? So we need to figure out. Technically, this listener is part of the performance degradation bundle I developed for this demo. And if we'll go to this listener, we can see that there is some kind of weird operation here, some heavy operation used. In this case, I have get the data grid data for one of the product data grids from the storefront. And definitely we can get rid of this listener, or at least refactor it in order to get this data easier or faster to get rid of this performance issue. There are two more approaches that you can use if you want to optimize performance of your application. First of all, disable unused features. Or Commerce by default offers you quite a lot of features all across the application that are configured in a very flexible way, and most of them are enabled. So what you can do, you can disable many of these features that you do not need right now. For example, if you're using discounts, you can disable discounts. If you're not using taxes, you can disable taxes and so on. And you can also optimize the features you are using. So optimization includes refactoring of the code, configuring them, or maybe excluding some kind of classes, or maybe even the components that you not use, and so on. Or Commerce is written in like way that covers all the use cases out of the box. You may narrow the scope and disable the features that you don't need, and optimize the features you need only to cover the cases that you want to cover. Finally, the hardware. So the hardware is pretty important aspect of running the application. When you're running in them on the some kind of remote server, you have to monitor three things: the CPU load, the memory usage, and the disk space usage. Disk space usually not a problem because nowadays it's pretty cheap to have a big hardware. However, the CPU time or processors loading and memory used is an important aspect there. The processor's CPU time can be consumed by the web server, by the job nodes, by the database management system, by the Elasticsearch, RabbitMQ, and all other servers. And you need to take care of this hardware in order to verify that you have enough to handle the load that you plan to handle. Same with the memory. Take into account that each PHP process will take a memory. Each service, like a database management system or Elasticsearch, will take a memory. Each consumer running in the background will consume some memory, and so on and so on. And again, you have to verify to have enough memory. How to handle this stuff if, let's say, you don't have enough processors memory? So technically, it's scaling issue. So you can either upgrade the existing nodes, or you can increase the number of nodes you have in your application. Of course, to do that, you have to know what kind of load you need to handle in order to prepare the initial setup. Then track the load, and if you already seeing that the hardware cannot handle the load, you have to adjust it, and ideally adjust the hardware in advance. This way you can guarantee a smooth experience for your users and pretty good performance of the application overall. So guys, these were the primary recommendations from our team. So these are recommendations we're following for already 7 years, maybe even more, by developing our customization for us and for our customers. And these are the best practices we're sharing with you because we want you to be successful as well. Before we go to Q&A session, I would like to tell you about the our training that our company is going to conduct in nearest future. There will be two OR fundamentals session, one for the Europe and one for North America, and you may participate in these trainings online. There is a schedule in the internet. You may check information about this trainings online at this page. So here you can see information about European training, and there is a similar information about the training in North America. And that's all, guys. If you have some questions, feel free to post them to the Zoom. I will be happy to answer them. Okay, let me quickly check it. Yeah, we indeed have a couple of questions here. So the first question from Carla Merida: how can you manage to access cloned code in a virtual machine like VirtualBox using PHP Storm? There are two ways to do it. The first one, I would say the recommended way is to keep your PHP Storm inside the virtual machine. So have a UI, and you can install, for example, Linux Ubuntu with Unity inside the virtual machine and run the PHP Storm inside the virtual machine. That's why you will encapsulate everything. The second approach is through the using of shared folders, but this approach has one major disadvantage because that virtual file system, let's say VirtualBox using, it's pretty slow. So you have to either expose only the SSD directory, which is pretty small, or find some other way to exchange the data, for example, either using SSH or any other external storage or external file system. How to create custom fields from code. As far as I remember, there is a good documentation how to do it. You may just check in the ORA documentation extended fields, or if you want, you can check the ORA core. In the ORA core, we have several examples of creating extended fields, extended relations, and so on. Let me quickly check that in the documentation. Yep, we have a pretty good documentation. Let me quickly post it to the chat. So this is the reference to the extend entity tool, extend entity component in general in OR, and there you can see how to create new fields, how to refresh the data, and there you can also check links that will explain you how to create associations, how to create serialized fields, and many other useful information about the extended components and extended fields. All right. The next question from Christian Murray: will the recording be available? It's currently recording, and as far as I remember, it will be, as far as I know, it will be available on YouTube in some time. Okay, the fourth question from Krzysztof Kurzydło. I have a customer that provides JSON files with product data that should be imported every day. Native import-export uses CSV file. What is the situation for implementing such customization? Should I create separate commands to convert JSON to CSV and then put CSV through native raw functionalities, or create custom reader and pass it to the import-export service through the dependency injection? It's just a matter of time. So how much time you will need to do each of these things. To be honest, I would probably create a custom reader, because in my opinion, it will be a little bit faster, because like reading JSON, you will have to read JSON and convert to some other format anyway. And if you'll do it if you're doing from scratch, it will save you some time, both your development time and execution time. So I would vote for the second option with creating custom reader. So I think that's it for now. Any other question, guys? Looks like no. All right, guys. In such a case, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I was happy to see all of you on this webinar, and I would like to join to our next Aura Tech Talk. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.